The Japanese are right there in the Horn of Africa, just above Sudan, near Ethiopia, and below the trouble spots, Yemen and the other areas. So what are they doing by opening a naval base there, Ben?
Well, the Japanese armed forces are actually quite huge and a lot more powerful than people have realized. They call themselves self-defense forces, and I don't believe that there's ever going to be a return to militarism. But I believe they're setting up to replace what they believe will be a vacuum as the U.S. starts to scale down its military presence worldwide. The Americans simply are not able to afford 800 bases anymore worldwide. And the Japanese rely very much on the shipping that goes through that area. And so they need to start protecting it themselves. And I also believe that they're going to step in. I mean, they want to continue a military alliance with the United States. The Japanese military, I point this out, wishes to remain allied militarily to the United States. But they do not like the government in Washington, D.C., so they feel that government is going to go, and they're going to stay allied to the American people. But they realize there's going to be a huge gap to fill. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the U.S. bases in Japan. And basically, I've heard from someone at the Pentagon, and also the Japanese are saying they're going to have to probably withdraw a lot of those troops from Japan, too. You just can't afford to be the world's policeman because the world doesn't want to pay you to be the policeman anymore because you weren't acting like a policeman. You were acting like a thug or a gangster. You weren't protecting. You were robbing. That's what happened in Iraq. That's what happened in Afghanistan. That's what you've been doing in places like the Congo. You've been stealing resources instead of guarding people. So I believe this is part of a big thing. It's not just the United States. The Russians conducted a huge naval exercise with all their top fleets in the Sea of Japan, in between Japan and China. I think what they're saying is to the Japanese, hey, listen, if push comes to shove, the Americans aren't going to fight the Chinese for you, but we will because we share a border with them just like you do. So there's a lot of posture we're preparing for what's going to take place after the collapse of the post-World War II structures. That includes, I believe, the United Nations as it stands now, the IMF, the National Security Council, and NATO. I believe the Europeans are eventually going to just ally themselves with Russia. So a lot of big changes are happening. And there's a lot of still fighting and murdering on. I'm sure, for example, the Polish government was assassinated. But I'm not sure if that was the Russians who did it or the Europeans who did it. It would seem pretty stupid of the Russians to do it inside Russian territory on the anniversary of the Katyn massacre.
Does seem a little dumb, I agreed. Yeah.
It reminds me of the Litvinenko case where they have this guy killed in England and they have a trace of radioactive evidence going all the way back to Russia. It's just too contrived.
Right.
So I suspect they're trying to frame the Russians here, but I'm not sure on this one. But whatever it was just not a normal plane crash. I think everybody who's following.
Everybody knows that. It's like the Ron Brown assassination. They guided the plane right down into the ground. It's very easy to do. Who did it?
Yeah.
I don't know. But there was one stewardess who survived the Ron Brown. This was Air Force 2, remember, folks, who survived the Ron Brown plane crash and was walking around when the first American helicopter crew arrived. She was medevaced out of there, but unfortunately was found to be dead when the helicopter finally landed at a medical facility. So he was found, of course, with a gunshot.
I think I've talked about it before, but I want to talk about it again. In 1985, a Japan Airlines flight with 500 people on board flew around, missing half its tail for a couple of hours. The U.S. refused to let them land at a U.S. military base. They crashed in the Japanese Alps. A U.S. helicopter showed up at the scene but didn't help anybody. And the Japanese rescue teams weren't allowed in there until about 24 hours later. And there was still one survivor, a stewardess. But she refuses to talk. But the people at the Japanese security police have told me the United States shot that airplane down with a missile. The United States being the CIA George Bush Sr. Nazi criminal nexus within your government structure. Deliberately shot that plane down in order to force the Japanese to sign the Plaza Accords, which basically ruined their economy. People forget, but it used to be Japan is number one, everybody was middle class, fast economic growth, and suddenly the lost 2 decades. Well, this was pure thuggery that caused that to happen. But these people have been doing it worldwide. Another one, and I hope maybe you could put this up on your page and do some of the research, but the Titanic was deliberately smashed into an iceberg, and then they, at gunpoint, forced all these financiers to stay on board and die. And remember, it was J.P. Morgan who said, let's all work out our differences on the transatlantic cruise. Let's all get there and talk. And he didn't get on the boat at the last minute. And the J.P. Morgan is the same people, basically, behind George Bush Sr. to this day. It's the same racially supremacist, eugenicist, Nazi cabal. And they've done an awful lot of harm to humanity. And I believe that worldwide there's a movement to take these people down, or at least to turn them away from their genocidal tendencies and make them more decent again. Because there was good stuff about the Nazis. They invented a lot of stuff. They treated the German workers well. The trains ran on time.
Well, they invented a lot of things. They were mass murderers
and torturers and sadists.
Well, now, hold on. So were the Americans, so were the British, so were the Russians. Nobody came away from that thing with clean hands. Don't believe it for a minute. You people out there know damn well that it's a lie. We're just as dirty and filthy as anything the Germans did, the Nazis did.
Okay, it's true that Victor is the history, and that all the incredible war crimes of the Allies.
You should look at a book sometime of the German freeway system that Hitler ordered built in the 30s.
Okay, look,
it covered the whole country.
They did a lot of good stuff, but the point is,
I'm not done.
The Americans killed a lot, and so did the British.
Yeah, hold on, I'm not done. Let me finish.
There is a faction that has taken over a large part of your government under.
Right. You're right. No, you're right. You're right. Let me finish. I got 2 more things to add that people don't know about, Ben. They don't know this. The German government had the world's first mass anti-smoking campaign, the world's first massive anti-cancer public health awareness campaign, and you talk about the science and the inventions and the technology, and, well, it's legendary. I mean, this has all been obfuscated and hidden since the end of the war. But go ahead, please. I just wanted to put those out there because people don't know.
It is very true. What I'm saying is that there's a faction now that believes in eugenics. They're trying to create a super race, and they were planning to kill 4 billion people. And I know because they offered me to join them.
Well, they're going to kill more than that.
And I'd also like to conclude, like, people say, whatever happened to the ninjas, right? And the fact of the matter is that since the Chinese stood up, the world has turned upside down. People used to say, China will become a superpower in 20 or 50 years. And now it suddenly just happened. You had the Olympics, then you have this whole turn. Everyone's going down to China now to suck up to them. And you had the Lehman crisis. You have the U.S. government going around everywhere, Obama bending down and kissing people, begging for money. And I was in China, by the way, a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to a senior source directly linked to the Politburo who was at the meeting where former U.S. Treasury Secretary Paulson and Geithner were literally on their knees begging for money. On their knees.
Yeah.
And this is not something I heard on the internet. I heard from someone who was there. I was in Beijing. Okay?
I'd love to see it. I don't know if I can take that to the bank, so to speak, but literally, figuratively is one thing. They were begging.
Senior official said he witnessed this, okay?
All right. Well.
But the point is that they're not getting the money. And there really is a lot of funky stuff happening behind the scenes. I wish I could talk about it more, but things are at a very sensitive stage, and it's not a time to talk. But believe me, there's a lot of high-powered people worldwide working to save the American people from their criminal government. And it's just a matter of time. I'm sure of it.